You're listening to Answering the Call, the official podcast of the 12th Man Foundation. Our show provides listeners with an insider perspective of Texas A&M athletics and its greatest supporters. This podcast will bring you exclusive interviews with coaches, athletes, donors, and the dedicated staff of Aggie Athletics and the 12th Man Foundation. You ready? Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to Answering the Call. This is your host, Ivy Robinson, and I am just very excited to welcome today's guest, Texas A&M Athletics Director, Trev Alberts.
Thank you, Ivy. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today, Trev. And I've just got to say, upon your acceptance of the Director of Athletics role back in March, it has been quite literally a fast and furious 4 to 5 months for Aggie Athletics. I mean, Aggie baseball made it to the championship series in Omaha. Women's tennis won a national championship. Adela Cernosek won the very first individual national title in Aggie women's golf program history. And, if that wasn't enough, we also hosted an international soccer match and a George Strait concert at Kyle Field. So how has it been experiencing Texas A&M? I mean, not even 6 months into the job yet.
Well, it's been exhilarating, just like you said. I mean, it's been really remarkable. And I think the thing that you learn very quickly upon arrival at a place like this is, number one, we really do have elite coaches here. We have elite student athletes, and to watch our coaches work, to see how they interface with our student athletes, to watch them compete is really remarkable. I mean, this is the best of the best. And then to see the 12th Man Foundation, to see the 12th Man, everything, how this whole sort of thing interfaces with itself and kind of creates the level of excellence that I think our fans have come to expect is really remarkable. So it's just been exhilarating. It's been fun. It's exhausting at times, but it's why we do it. And look, if you're going to spend this amount of time and energy, you might as well win, right? Like at the end of the day, we're in the competition business. I know it's hard to think that way, but it's competing at everything. It's competing with how we treat our donors. It's competing with how well we treat our ticket holders. It's competing with how well we treat our student athletes. How well are they doing in the classroom? I mean, everybody just focuses on, the tennis court or the pool or the football field. At the end of the day, though, this is a holistic approach of chasing excellence in everything we do. And a place like Texas A&M, you get to do that.
Absolutely. We have a standard of excellence here that we're chasing after each and every day. And It's exciting to see what the future holds for Aggie Athletics. So how are you adjusting to College Station, the life in Aggie land so far?
It's been wonderful. My wife and I, we have 3 children, but we're empty nesters now. And so when you make a transition like this, it's a little bit easier when you don't have young kids or trying to think about what schools you're going to go to or how to navigate through those types of things. But we are on our 3rd different rental unit at this point. So we have sold our home in Nebraska. We've closed on that. We have purchased a home, but it's not quite finished. So we're still in a little bit of a transition mode. But, at the end of the day, I just have been really blessed to have a wife that allows me to do what I love to do, which is basically work. And there's a lot to do here. And so she manages all that. But we've just loved it here. The people are so genuine. Everything that we thought the place was going to be about, as I mentioned in my press conference, this connection with agriculture, the military, all of these, the values of Texas A&M are real, and it's ones that my wife and I share. So, and we've, by the way, loved all the restaurants. Like, this is pretty good eats, right?
Yeah. Do you have a favorite restaurant so far?
We've been to, I like Napa Flats a lot, to be honest. I've been there several times.
Napa Flats is good.
I mean, it's you can't go wrong there. But I don't like to point out one because there's nothing bad here. I've not had a meal where my wife and I go, gosh, we wouldn't go there again. We literally, when we moved into our casita out at Traditions, they gave us a list of local restaurants. And so, as I said, we're empty nesters, and my wife is kind of retired from the kitchen at this point. So we're literally going down this list, and she's making a check mark on all these restaurants. There's not one, and I'm not saying there's not a single restaurant we've gone to that she marked out and said we wouldn't go there again. It's really fantastic, and we've loved it.
So I'm glad you mentioned your family. That actually leads great into my first question. And you actually mentioned your introductory speech from your welcome celebration event in March. And something that you said really stood out to me, and that was that your family has always been connected to the dirt.
Yeah.
And that caught my attention because same thing for me. I grew up on a cattle ranch here in Texas, and so my family is also connected to the dirt. But wanted to start with that topic that agriculture is a huge part of who you are, and agriculture is also a significant part of this university and
Mm.
its history. So, can you tell us about your upbringing in rural Iowa?
Yeah, I literally had the best upbringing I think you could possibly have because I had all the benefits of everything. So my mom and dad were both farm kids, and these are mostly grain farms, corn and soybeans. I think my grandfather, my mom's side, he fed cattle for a while, and my dad's side they milked and but primarily it was, corn and soybeans. So my dad was the only boy. He was going to be a farmer. Met my mom at a church Bible conference, and my mom told him his senior year in high school that she wasn't interested in being a farmer's wife. So my dad had to do this 11th hour pivot and suddenly get interested in education. So he went to the University of Northern Iowa, got a business degree, an accounting degree, and he went to work for the Cedar Falls utility. So Cedar Falls was about 35 miles from all of our farms. And unfortunately, my grandfather on my dad's side got cancer at 57. And so my dad, at like 30 years old, buys the farms. And because my grandfather made him. And so he started, like, we had to farm on the side. So I got to live in town, got to benefits of some of that, but every night after school and on Saturdays and all summer, we worked on the farm. So I learned all the benefits of being connected to the dirt. I learned how to work hard. I learned how to be out in the middle of a field and the plow falls off, the tractor, and you have to figure out how to jerry rig the thing back on. Otherwise, that's just how it is. I mean, so I think a little bit of common sense comes that way, just to value. I don't know, there's just something different. And I had this sneaking suspicion when you think about our culture today, the further we move away from more and more people not connected to the dirt, it feels like we have more problems. And so I just always feel like I've been privileged to get a great education, but also understand just how important agriculture is, what it means not only to the state of Texas, but all across the US, and how just blessed we are to be in a country that has such fertile opportunity in terms of the dirt and all that. So, yeah, that's kind of my background, and we've been blessed to be able to maintain the farms, and my wife and I have added to them. It's meant enough to us that we really want our children to continue being connected to the dirt. Now they're not farming, but we get out there
Mhm.
and they enjoy it a little bit. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
I love that. I completely agree with you. I think agriculture is the foundation of a lot of things, a lot of industries, and so it's important to stay connected to it. And even if you don't grow up in it, just get outside, go for a walk, go to a park, educate yourself on where our food comes from
yeah.
and the families and the lives who are producing that to feed our world and support our nation and our world. So it's great. So when did you first get involved in sports?
Well, so nobody in my family had ever played a sport, and so I thought I was being strategic and smart because as a young boy, it. I mean, we were up at 5:30 every Saturday while all of my friends were watching cartoons on Saturday in town. I'm out working. So I thought, gosh, if I go out for sports, maybe I'll get out of chores. I'll get out of farm work. And that backfired really bad on me because my dad just waited for me to get done with practice and then we went out to the farm. It was about a 30-minute drive to get from Cedar Falls to the farms. And so, it was relatively early. And I'll tell you, part of the benefit and early on, I kind of stood out athletically, not so much because of physical talent, but working on the farm, I was just stronger than a lot of the kids my age. And my dad, because we were kind of part-time farmers where he would have to take off vacation. I mean, you'd be fourth and fifth grade and you're driving the tractor with a field cultivator, getting ready. We got a disc over here, a field cultivator, and then you're planting behind it. So at a very early age, we were doing legitimate work, and so I just kind of fell in love with the whole camaraderie of a team, the competitive piece, and it came kind of natural to me. And I think early on in life, when something's easy and you're good at it, you kind of drawn to it. Yeah.
So at what point did you realize that you wanted to play football and maybe pursue that on a collegiate level?
Well, I never really, that seems so far outside of, I went to this little bitty school, and I think we had 60 total kids in our class, and seven of them were foreign exchange students. So, but early on in my going into my senior year, I went to the Iowa football camp just for fun, and we had to run a 40, and they pulled me aside afterwards. I could always run really fast, and they said, "Hey, just want to let you know we're going to be watching you." we think you are a good player. So it's about my second game, my senior year. I was outside. My mom and dad made us rake all the leaves. It was a great fun thing. And my mom comes out. So you guys are really young, but in 1989, they came out with a phone that didn't have to be connected to the wall. It had like this long, yeah, I know you wouldn't, but in the old day, you literally had this cord and you'd have a 40-foot cord and you'd walk around the house, but it always had to be connected to, right, on the wall. Well, they came out with these phones that you could actually had an antenna and you could leave, but you could only go so far. So my mom comes out with this phone and she said she didn't know who it was. And it happened to be a gentleman by the name of Earl Bruce, who was a former head coach at Ohio State, but he was the head coach at the University of Northern Iowa, which is in Cedar Falls. It was a Division I AA school. And he said, we'd like to offer you a scholarship. And I said, well, what do you mean you're going to offer me a scholarship? And he goes, well, if you come here and you play football, we pay for your school and your housing. And I said, well, that's amazing. And he said, do you want to commit now? And I said, well, I probably better talk to my mom and dad. And he goes, yeah, that's probably a good idea. That was the first time that I realized that I might be able to play football in college. It was never a goal of mine. I didn't grow up. A lot of guys now are like, have his dream of playing in the NFL. I grew up, we didn't have a TV when I grew up. And so we just worked. And, we were fans of like the Bears or the Vikings up there in the Midwest, but didn't know anything really about them. Had never been to a pro game, never been to a college game. And so it kind of dawned on my dad and mom were like, wow. And so we reached out to our high school coach and said, hey, just want to let you know, Trev's starting to get recruited. And he goes, yeah, I figured he probably would. And so that just kind of became real to us. I'd watched my older brother work so hard to pay for his way through college. And I thought, what a deal. I mean, I get to play a game that I love and I don't have to pay to get an education. That's unbelievable. Of course, things have changed a little bit from those days.
Just a little bit.
So,
Wow, that's so interesting. So it
yeah.
just kind of you stumbled upon it. Basically, it came your way. It wasn't something
Yeah.
that you had pictured, but
No, I mean, my high school didn't even have we didn't have a JV team. We only had like, I don't know, 29 players on the team, 9th through 12th grade. We didn't have a weight room in my high school. It was very, very small. So I was a very raw. I'm 6'4", so I was tall. I was skinny. I'd never lifted weight, but I could run fast. And so I'm sure they just were projecting me as a project that they could kind of mold. And so that's how it kind of started.
so at what point were you recruited by the University of Nebraska?
So then I continued playing my senior year, and things went well, and I got an offer then from Iowa State. I got an offer from Minnesota, and Iowa. I'd kind of made the mistake of publicly saying, "Man, if Iowa ever offered me, I want to go to Iowa. I want to." So Iowa was kind of playing around with, well, maybe we can get him to walk on, because I didn't understand the business of that. And it literally was, I think it was in January, February was the signing date. In January, we'll never forget, my high school principal, Dr. Moore, was a graduate of the University of Nebraska. He sent a letter and a copy of an article in the local paper I was in to the recruiting coordinator in Nebraska. And he said, hey, I don't know if this guy can play or not, but he's being recruited by Iowa and Iowa State and Minnesota. You might want to take a look at him. And so Dave Gillespie was his name, and he called and he said, could you send us some tape of you playing? And I said, well, sir, unfortunately, we don't have anybody filming our games. And that's a true story. And so we were kind of disappointed because he goes, well, it's going to be hard for us to evaluate you if we don't have any. Well, we found out that one of the young ladies who was a classmate of mine, her name's Dawn Dirks, her father just happened to be a huge football fan. He wasn't a coach, but there was one game, and I think it was against Denver, town of Denver in Iowa, and he had a Beta camera, one of those old school, and raw, literally that's what I sent in. And it was a couple weeks later, and a gentleman named John Melton came to my door in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It was snowing, knocked on the door and said he was with the University of Nebraska and was there to offer me a scholarship. And we were just like floored because Nebraska, they were playing for national championships. And so when Iowa found out that Nebraska offered me a scholarship, then they offered me a scholarship real fast. And so it was really hard for me because I loved Iowa, still do. I respect Iowa. My dad still lives in Iowa, but Nebraska was just a little bit further along. They had the academic support, they had a training table, they had a life skills that, all the stuff that we all take for granted today. They were kind of early on in that. And so I just fell in love with Tom Osborne and Nebraska. And next thing you know, I'm going 300 miles west from my hometown, and all of a sudden I have a scholarship to play at the University of Nebraska.
What an awesome story. Thank you for sharing that.
In fact,
So
it's even better. I got to tell you one quick
oh,
story. So
please do, yes.
my dad calls to the football office, and he said, they say my son is being recruited by Nebraska, and he said, that can't be right, because he was like, there's no way my son can play at Nebraska. If they were really serious, wouldn't Tom Osborne come to our house? And 2 days later, Coach Osborne flew to our house, and he said, Mr. Alberts, we don't offer scholarships to guys we don't think can play here. And so even to this day, like my dad, I'm like, yeah, Dad. He just didn't
He
quite believe in me. But our family just didn't have that sports orientation. We just didn't know enough about it, and but a real privilege to get the opportunity to be a student athlete in college.
How neat. Yeah, that was one of my questions too, is if you had any family members that played collegiate sports or who worked in athletics, but you were kind of the trailblazer.
Yeah, no, we of course everybody loves sports, and but no, nobody on my mom or dad's side. I mean, I think back now to some of the folks. I think, okay, that guy probably could have played football, but in those days you were trying to eat. And so if you would have went to your dad and said, "Hey, and I'm going to go out for golf or football," or you might have gotten disciplined because there was work to do and chores to do. So it was just a different time and a different era. But I was really fortunate to be in that intermediate where I had the privilege of doing that. And then my wife and I had a daughter that played volleyball and earned a scholarship at Clemson, and so she got to play Division One sport. So it's kind of fascinating.
So what did you end up studying at the University of Nebraska?
Communication studies, and didn't quite know what I wanted to do when I went there, and so they kind of helped me, and it really was good for me. It was something that kind of came natural to me, and I really enjoyed it. Didn't know what I was going to do post, and so ultimately it was kind of cool when I graduated. When I got done, I actually got to use it a little bit. But yeah, that's what I ended up getting a major in.
So, following your time in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts, you served as an analyst on college and professional football for major national networks, including ESPN and CBS Sports Network. So, can you tell us about your time working in that capacity and what that was like during your career?
Yeah, it was really remarkable. It was fun, but it was a little bit like getting the opportunity to be a student athlete and play football. I mean, obviously wasn't something I was, but I got done playing in Indianapolis. I had my illustrious 3-year NFL career, and where I fell short of everyone's expectations. And I didn't know what to do. And my wife and I had actually moved back to Lincoln, and I was thinking about getting started on my sort of next career. What was I going to do? And I'd actually taken a job at a local bank called NBC Bank, and I was in institutionalized investments. And my job was to get small banks across the state to overnight their dollars and hold it at NBC Bank. And I got a kind of a crazy phone call from my football agent, who was no longer my agent because I was done playing football, but my football agent. And he said, "Hey, I just received a phone call from the president of CNN Sports, and they're going to be starting a college football show on CNN, and they'd like to know if you'd like to audition." And I said, "Yeah, thanks, but I'm not I'm not interested in doing that." So I went home and I told my wife, I said, "Yeah, you're not gonna believe the call I got today. This guy said he," and she said, "You said what?" And she said, "You call him back and tell him that you're interested." And I said, "Well, why?" And she goes, "Well, that's kind of cool." So I called him back, and I went to Atlanta. I'd never been really outside the Midwest, but I flew to Atlanta, and I auditioned in the CNN Center in Atlanta, in the Omni Hotel there. It was just fascinating. This was right during the '96 Olympics. So Atlanta was really evolving and changing as a city. And I got the job. I was shocked. And so I had to step down from the bank to do this job. And I ended up doing it about 12 years. I spent 5 years at CNN. I spent 3 years at ESPN, and then another 3 years at CBS. And then everything changed in 2008.
Man, what was the audition like? I'm just curious for
Well,
that first position?
so you wouldn't probably know these names, but people listening might. So there were three of us that were quote finalists. One, his name was Don Makowski. They called him Magic Man. He was an All-Pro quarterback for the Packers. And the second one was Sean Gale. He was a defensive back for the Chicago Bears, 10-year pro, six-time Pro Bowler. And then there's me, bad football player, 3 years. But so when I agreed to audition, if I gonna decide to do something, then I'm gonna win. I mean, you'll do whatever it takes, right? And so I would call, I'll never forget the guy's name was Bill Galvin. And Bill's a great guy, very talented. And so I would call Bill and I'd say, hey, can you give me any idea about what can I do to prepare? And he'd say, well, Trev, I really can't do that. That's not fair to the other. But I just kept calling and I kept beating him down to the point where he said, well, it wouldn't be terrible if you did this. And it wouldn't be terrible if you did this. It's a story of my life, and it's a story of anybody's life, really. If you want to be successful, you have to outwork other people.
Persistence.
And
Persistence
persistence.
pays off.
And so I had done quite a bit of work. And it doesn't mean that they hadn't done a lot of work. I think the other reason why they didn't do it is because the pay wasn't at a level that probably was commensurate with their expectations. For me, I just couldn't believe that somebody was going to pay me to sit there and talk about football on CNN. Like, I thought I should have probably paid them. So, but that's really it. I mean, I just kept pestering them, saying, "Tell me something." I mean, I can't come all the way to Atlanta, and it's not really a fair measure of my skills if I have no idea what I'm doing. And so, I did a lot of preparation, and I think ultimately that helped me a lot.
It got the job.
Yeah.
That's right. So from that time, what led to your first director of athletics role? So when did you start deciding, hey, maybe I want to shift out of this broadcast world and enter into the world of collegiate athletics?
Well, our kids were starting to get a little bit older. The middle daughter that I told you about who played volleyball at Clemson was playing a lot of club sports. And so the problem with what I was doing is I was traveling so much. We stayed living in Marietta, just outside of Atlanta, using the airport there. But for a while there at CBS, I did shows in New York City on Wednesday. We'd tape them from Chelsea Piers right there in Manhattan, fly back, and I would do a bunch of calls with the coaches. We'd do all that. Then I did a college football game on Saturday, and then I left there and I flew to an NFL game, and I did an NFL game on Westwood One Radio on Sundays. And then I would fly back Monday morning. So I was home a day and a half. And one day my little third grade daughter says, how come Daddy never comes to my soccer games? So can you imagine what that does to you, right? So I'm like, all right, this probably needs to be adjusted. And so I just kind of was at least a little receptive and praying about it and just, saying, Lord, is there, something I can do? And it just happened in 2008. I get a phone call from my mentor in football, Tom Osborne. And he said, they're going to name me the athletic director here in Lincoln. And wondered if have you ever thought about working in athletic administration? And I said, no, I have no idea what those people do. Never thought about it once. And he said, well, I think you would do a nice job, and why don't you think about it? So I went through a whole process. My wife, who's not from Nebraska, was not in favor of leaving Georgia. And we looked at it hard, and it just didn't feel right. And so I said, I can't come. And so I went back to work at CBS again for another year. And then in 2009, a Board of Regent member from the University of Nebraska called and said, hey, we have this open AD job at the University of Nebraska Omaha, which is the metropolitan, but part of the same system, same regions and everything. And we can't get anybody to apply for this job. And we've had 17 ADs in 30 years. Would you consider coming and serving the university? Now, I didn't say I was a very smart guy. You would think if someone would tell you that, you would run from that opportunity, right? Like you would never. But no, not Trev. I seemed to run to the fire, and I ended up taking a large reduction in salary, moving our family, and the kids were at a very formidable stage of their life. They weren't thrilled, fourth grader, sixth grader, and kindergartner. But it was a really good thing for us. After 12 years, I didn't find fulfillment. I wasn't challenged. It was, to be honest with you, kind of boring. And I like to struggle a little bit. And boy, this was a struggle for me. I had so much to learn. And so it was a period of transition for our family. But those 12 years in Omaha really helped form everything today for me. And the business leadership in Omaha, I got a master's degree in business and working with some of the most brilliant men and women business leaders. I always surrounded myself with an advisory group. We worked through some very delicate and challenging things within athletics. And so I was there 12 years, then 3 years in Lincoln, so 15 years total. And now, by the grace of God, I guess I'm here in College Station, Texas. So
And here you are. You know, you talk about learning all the challenges you had at Omaha and at Lincoln and what you learned there. I'm sure those were pivotal years,
mhm.
for your career and the future direction and path you were headed. So, walk us through what the adjustment was like coming into Texas A&M and M and the AD role here, and what have your priorities been so far for the athletics department, and what challenges excite you within this role here?
Well, I would say first and foremost, every job is basically the same when you go into it. It's no different here than when I went into UNO, when I went into Lincoln. All of those places are great places. They have full of potential. There's strengths and weaknesses of every place. But you first go in and you assess, where are we today, right? And that's the first thing you have to do because you can't possibly or reasonably understand where are we going or where are we heading if you don't know where the starting point is. Like if I'm going to say, well, I'm going to head back to the casitas, but if I don't know where I am, I'll never get there. So I think that's the first thing you have to do. I think you have to try to work hard to establish trust. You have to, you know, transparent communication, I think is really critical. You have to have credibility with your head coaches. You have to have credibility with your campus. You have to have credibility with our donors, with our regents. And so a lot of it's ambitious, it's work, but it's just defining, and at the end of the day, then part of what I like to do is say, listen, this is not my athletic department. UNO's was not mine, neither was Lincoln. I'm just a steward of, so try to understand what's unique about this place, what's important to this place, what are the challenges, what's the job. Every job's a little bit different. And then my job is to look for opportunities and challenges. I think you have to cast a vision in leadership, and I think you have to clearly communicate where you are, where you're going, and what the vision is. And I learned that from my mentors. 70% of the people when you enter an organization are just dying for somebody to say, "What's the plan? What's the vision?" Hey, like, what do we do? Why do we do it? And what's my role in it? And how do I feel like I'm contributing to the team? There's another 15% that are going to say, I don't know who this clown is. Does he even know what he's talking about? But eventually they come over and they're great. And there's another 15% that no matter what you do are never going to get on board. And it's probably time for them to go. And it's okay. And part of it is because it's not so much the organization. Maybe they haven't had the confidence. Maybe it's not a good fit for them. And helping them move on to something that they can be more comfortable and happy isn't such a bad thing. Sometimes we in life get stuck in situations that we're just not sure how to get out of. So, I think that, but I think what makes this job so uniquely, you could say challenging, but I think so uniquely well positioned and rewarding is that, as we all know, we're undergoing transformational change in college athletics. And we're basically pro now. I mean, we're pro, we're paying players, and it's hard to understand. And so you think about a complex organization that values tradition like this place does. In a lot of places, but this place, I think, and this is what I'm drawn to because I love tradition. I love all the stuff that makes this place unique. But how do you modernize our approach in a way that, I mean, this was done to us, not because of us. We didn't choose this new path, right? But how do we find a way to take where we are today, modernize it, modernize the department to adjust to the reality of essentially operating in a pro space, but yet stay true to the values of what makes Texas A&M Texas A&M. And I'm drawn to that challenge, but I can't do it by myself. And so what I like to do is surround myself with a great group of people. I've got an internal advisory group, I've got an external advisory group, and I like to just go to work with business people on finding solutions. And this is a place that no matter what happens to college athletics, we're going to be okay. as long as we're humble enough to recognize things and we have enough courage to adjust and adapt and communicate it well, Texas A&M is going to emerge out of this as a leader. I firmly believe that.
So something you had mentioned in that response was you want to be a steward of this athletic department, and that
Mhm.
leads great into my next question about the 12th Man Foundation. Many of our listeners are aware of the Centennial Campaign, but I'll just go ahead and state a few things about the Centennial Campaign for those who don't know about it. But in April of 2023, the 12th Man Foundation Centennial Campaign surpassed its 120 million fundraising goal to fund the construction of the Adam C. Senn Academic and Wellness Center, the Coolidge Football Performance Center, the R.A. Murray Faskin Indoor Track and Field, and the redevelopment of the Bright Slocum Center. And then the redeveloped area south of Kyle Field is transforming into the Graham Athletic Complex. So we are just so grateful
Mm.
for every Aggie who has answered the call for support for Texas A&M athletics and for our student athletes through this campaign. And Trev, I want to know, what are your thoughts on the facilities and what do they mean for the future of Aggie athletics?
Well, first of all, I join you in thanking all of our donors. I want to thank the 12th Man Foundation for all their hard work. I mean, I think it's a real differentiator for us relative to our peers to have such an established, well respected foundation within athletics that clearly our donors have a lot of confidence in. You know, it's operated in a way under Travis's leadership that really resonates with our donors and corporate partners. So that's really, really important. But I will just tell you, you know, at a place like that, and again, at a place like Texas A&M, you can have it all, right? Like you can have elite coaches, you can have the best facilities in college athletics, you can have the best fan experience in college athletics, you can have the best business strategy that leads to success given this new reality. But I'll just tell you that, you know, because of the 12th Man Foundation, because of our donors, Texas A&M is in front of everybody else. Y'all, I'm learning that in word too. You guys have done you did the stadium literally a decade ago. You know how many people right now are in the middle of trying to figure out, well, gosh, now with this new reality, we better find a way to generate as much revenue as we can, self generated revenue. We've got to find a decade ago, leadership here saw an opportunity and took advantage of it. And so, as you think about the future now and you think about how well Coach Elko and our coaches are set up, I don't know that, you know, as a result of the recent campaign that was ultra successful, I don't know that that's ever going to happen again, right? I mean, I don't know that other universities are going to have that capability because of this new shifting reality in college athletics. So, again, we've got a stadium that, of course, there's going to be deferred maintenance on it. We're going to have to keep it up. But you got a stadium that is so well positioned to have an incredible student athlete experience, an incredible fan experience, and generate and meet our fans where they want. Is it a suite, club seat, where whatever you want and your experience, Kyle Field has it for you. And by the way, it helps us generate a significant amount of revenue. And then you have all the development pieces that are done. You have a facility that not just supports football, but all of our student athletes. It helps us stay true to our values. This is the highest cumulative GPA that the athletic department's ever had. Stuff like this, investments into those types of facilities. I used to say this all the time. People will say, well, what does the building really do to that? Facilities inspire. Facilities inspire people. It inspires great coaches to come here, administrators. It helps in retention, student athletes. And so I just can't say enough about how well Texas A&M athletics is positioned as a result of that campaign and the success of our donors.
Thank you for speaking to that. You know, how would you say that facilities and the resources that we have here really impact the well-being of our student athletes at Texas A&M?
Well, I don't know the environments that all of our student athletes come from, but I can only tell you that I can only imagine when you come to a place like this. I mean, it just exudes an organization that cares, right? And so facilities inspire, and yet it's still the people that are going to really matter within it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you're able to acquire and retain elite talent, not just coaches, but administrative folks that want to be here because they have the facilities, they have the things that actually allow them to use their expertise. So when student athletes come here, whether it's the training table, academic support, psychological services with Ryan, you know, just all of the things that we offer, I think there's just this level of comfort. And that's why you see in recruiting, I mean, This is a place that I think young men and young women feel like that they can come, be cared for. They're truly going to be loved. And I mean, I'm still just dumbfounded by our baseball team and to watch all those young men. They don't want to leave here, right? And it's how much they're embraced by the 12th man over at Bluebell, how they're treated. That stuff matters. And I think it goes to what the values are right outside my office that I look at all the time. That's what we're staying true to. And our donors make that happen for us.
Can you provide us with any updates on potential facility projects at Texas A&M in the future?
Well, we're always working on things, and so obviously it's been fairly public. We have some opportunity in Bluebell. I think we can take advantage of some of the momentum that our baseball program has done, and so I think you'll see some of that. I think you'll see, I know we've had some donor support for our women's soccer program. We've had some donor support for our tennis program, and so we'll continue. What we'll be very careful about is obviously it's up to donors, but there's also premium spaces and other things. What we can't do in this new reality is we can't add operating debt, debt service to our operating budgets that aren't tied to revenue. That's where you end up in athletic departments getting in trouble. Where, let's say you have donor interest in a project of $10 million, and maybe you can come up with another $5 million that is directly tied to premium seats, and then turn around and do a $90 million project. It really stresses the athletic department because we're adding debt service to our operating budgets, because I think, as most people know now, we've got a $21.5 million new expense category in athletics that's essentially shared revenue. And so we'll have to be more careful about that. We'll never stop doing projects because donors have interest in them, number one. Number two, it's great for our student athletes and fan experience. But I think they'll just hopefully be a little bit more thoughtful about in this new reality, in terms of what the funding and the cash flow looks like.
So you mentioned revenue share. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But on the same topic of the Aggie student athlete experience, right, and enhancing that experience for our student athletes, the 12-Man Foundation is dedicated. It's part of our mission is to help the athletic department really enhance that experience. And something that is new recently is the 12-Man Foundation's annual fund. Contributions to that fund are now supporting marketing opportunities for our student athletes for them to utilize their NIL. This effort is also in alignment with the other two ways to support NIL at Texas A&M, that being through Texas Aggies United and Amplify NIL. So,
Mhm.
can you speak a little bit to the alignment of supporting NIL in this era of college sports and how that alignment is successfully benefiting our athletic department?
Well, I don't know what the alignment looked like before I arrived. All I can tell you is that when I first got here, I know how important a comprehensive, holistic vision around NIL is, and everybody has a little part in it, right? And so you can have all these wonderful little ideas that are sort of in silos that are working, all very successful, but if they're not integrated into each other and leveraging the strengths of all of them, you really are falling short. And so very early on, we kind of brought everybody together into the third floor conference room, and we just talked about what are we all doing? What can we do better? What are things the administration can do? Because, by the way, there were things that we could do, and that's not a judgment of past leadership. The reality is this: what happened is there were rules that were in place not very long ago from the NCAA that we just literally could not put the institutional reputation on the line. So there's reputational risk. We had to be very careful about not breaking NCAA rules. And then literally the goalpost was moving every 3 months. And so it'd be really easy to point back at past leadership and say, well, they didn't support NIL. Well, they couldn't. And so as time goes on, and now we're at a point basically where there are no restrictions, what we learned was the best way to do it is to clearly define what everybody's role is. What can we do? Everybody has a little skin in the game, and then ultimately sell it. Sell it in a way that the donors can understand and sell it in a way that the student athletes can understand because it does matter to them. It ultimately matters to the institution as a result of that. And so I'm really pleased with, but again, the 12th Man Foundation is really a catalyst that helps us to organize all that. It really does. And so it's been a great partner, and I'm really happy with where it is. And I think our coaches are as well. There's always room for improvement, but I think everybody has the same objective, is we want to do what's best for the long term for Texas A&M athletics. As long as you have that perspective, you make good decisions.
From your perspective as a former student athlete, how have you seen NIL benefiting student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of short-term view of some is, things that maybe you just read negatively in the paper. The reality is there is some negatives to it. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But I would say there's a lot of good to it that never gets talked about either. Not everybody had the privilege of growing up like I did. And I know of families that are able to come and watch their sons and daughters compete in every game as a result of this because there's resources that allow them to do that. So I think there's a lot of positives to it. I think there's also a positive in the sense of what it's forced all of us to do. And so Jonathan Wallace now, who's really leading up that effort for us, I think things like financial literacy, our donors are very, very interested in making sure that we're doing everything that we can to not just view our student athletes as, well, she's a basketball player, he's a football player, but them as people. And so a lot of this stuff is beyond just the actual dollars of NIL. It's a vision around how we're actually helping to support them through life skills. And because I think that can be a separator for us too, because there will be other places that just look at them as widgets and transactional things. This place will never be like this. Place is always going to be a place that really views them as part of our Aggie family. And so there'll be support beyond just their athletic piece.
And so, kind of wrapping up the NIL portion here, what would be your message to donors and season ticket holders who maybe are still on the fence about supporting NIL? What is your encouragement to them to support those efforts here at Texas A&M?
Well, it's critically important to us. It really is. I mean, we're grateful for the support we do have. I think there's a lot of misinformation about it, and I think that's part of what we need to clean up nationally because, there'll be a rumor out there. I'm hearing that this guy, and none of it's even true. None of it's remotely close to true. So I think if we just got a little bit of clarity around it and transparency around it, I think others could probably get a little bit more comfortable with it. But I think and that's part of what we're still working on. I think making sure that all of our donors and potential donors know that there is a holistic strategy around this. It's not just hey, let's go out and buy that person. They come in here and we win or we don't. It's way more than that, at least under Coach Elko and the rest of our coaches. I think our strategies change significantly. This is the reality that we live in today. And the better that we execute this in this area, the better the return on investment will be. At the end of the day, we have one sport, football, that generates significant revenue. The rest of them we're, quote, subsidizing. Our ability to run our business as well as we possibly can is based on how well can we acquire and retain talent that allows us to grow success on and off the field that ultimately leads to revenue that takes pressure off our campus and our donors. And so it's not just a win-loss thing for me. There's a business strategy around it. There's also a student athlete benefit way beyond just the transactional nature of what the dollars are. And I think it's something that we can be proud of. That I think Texas A&M is a strong leader in this space, not just in the paying players, but the holistic vision. And Coach Elko is really helping to lead the charge there, frankly.
So I'm going to come back to revenue sharing now. From an educational standpoint, can you just provide our listeners some insight into this topic? Because listeners who closely follow college sports, they definitely have heard this term pop up. I mean, revenue sharing, a lot of people have been talking about this and what's to come down the road. But can you just give us your perspective and insight on this, and how are you steering the ship amidst such evolving change?
Well, so I'll do my best to answer that under 7 minutes. So basically, at the end of the day, we tried to create national standards through the NCAA, and we tried to legislate competitive equity. When you really think about it, what we were trying to do was to not let anybody, so we'd say you can only have this many scholarships. We limited all this stuff. And basically what the court said is you can't do that. That's an antitrust violation. And so one by one, every rule that the NCAA had was shot down as a national organization. We went to Congress, said, please help us. It's a tough thing to do when people have watched. I remember when the first football coach made $1 million a year, and people are like, $1 million. Well, look where we are today. And so at some point, people are like, okay, there's a little bit more to this. So I think we lost in court, and the Supreme Court sent a very clear message that they were in supportive of changing this. So, a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Kessler, who actually is a lawyer, plaintiff's lawyer in this case, in the House case, he actually was the lead plaintiff's attorney who brought free agency to the NFL. So once Jeffrey Kessler and his team got involved, I knew that this was serious and there was going to be some fundamental and massive change in our industry. And so ultimately, Judge Wilkin in the Ninth District of California ruled that you can't limit. She first started with the Alston ruling, which was you can't limit academic awards, and came up with the 5980 deal, which became Alston Awards. That was the first step, and we knew it was only the first step. And now we were going to get into the rest of this. And so, at the result of the House settlement, it's basically most of the pro franchises, it ends up roughly 50-50. The players get 50% of the revenue and the owners get 50%. And so you saw what the owners in pro sports did, right? So anything that happens in a football stadium, they have to share that revenue 50-50. But anything that happens outside the stadium, like development and all, they get to keep. So you watch pro franchises. You watch the Dallas Cowboys. Look at the Star. Look what happened. It's not just a stadium there. There's a whole that's where they're making most of their money. And so in the college space, because we don't have NFL owners, what we do have, and we provide a bunch of extra services to student athletes and maybe the NFL doesn't do. So we got credit instead of having to share 50% of it. We got credit for a lot of the stuff we're doing, like, sports psychology and academic support and training table and all that. So the ruling was we had to share 22%. That was the agreement. We settled. We did not go to trial. Because if we did, this was a class action lawsuit, which means it could be trebled, which means tripled. So if we would have lost, which, by the way, the NCAA was batting 1,000 in losses. They've lost every court case. So we could not go to court and lose and then have damages tripled because we would have all been bankrupt, including Texas A&M. So we agreed to 22% going forward. We also agreed through the Hubbard case to settle going backwards. So there are going to be student athletes, unfortunately not me, but those who played, I think, 2014 on, who are going to get some money for their name, image, and likeness. I'll be very frank and tell you that the lawyers are taking a lot of money. And I want this number to get out there because the lawyers are making a lot of money. They're taking a lot of money. And that's how life works. But so $2 million a year is being withheld from the NCAA distribution to pay the Hubbard case, which is going backwards. The House case is going forward, and that's essentially a cap of $19.5 million that we get to share with our student athletes. And so what we don't know yet is we're going to have new roster limits. We may or may not be allowed through the SEC to create scholarship limits within that because it's not a national standard. We still don't know that. And finally, you'll have to have a Title IX vision around how you're managing it. But the question is while it's a proportionality in terms of who's getting NIL deals, are they market driven or are they dollar for dollar? And we don't have that answer yet. So the reality is if they're not market driven, a $19.5 million cap, and it's a straight dollar for dollar, there will be a massive reduction in what is currently going to male student athletes. So that'll be interesting. So you ask, what's Texas A&M doing? Well, we're just sitting here and hoping that it all works out. Is that okay? No. We have, as I said earlier, we have an internal team in athletics that's working on some of the internal strategies about how do we think about with these new roster limits and scholarship limits, how are we going to allocate things? How do we create efficiencies? And so really, I think we have 4 alternatives. Number one, we can do nothing and just hope it works out and just hope that General Welsh gives us more subsidy and he just pays for it. And I've always learned in life that hope is not a strategy. So number one is probably not a good idea. Number two is we could probably go the route of just drastically cutting all kinds of sports, tiering our sports, going to, Mark Weaver and saying, thanks for winning the national championship, but going forward, we know you can't win, but we don't care if you can win because we're not can't support it. And, while down the road some way, if we fail other ways, maybe that has to happen. But I don't think any way you start with trying to get rid of opportunities for young people. It can't be. Texas A&M is just not a place I think there's a few universities across the country like this that is ever going to have a vision that says we're going to downsize our effort at excellence. We're not doing that here. We in fact believe that we can emerge out of this stronger than ever and actually dominate. That's the goal. I mean, we finished sixth in the Directors Cup this year, and that's really good. I take no credit for that, but if other schools have to do drastic things, our position might only be strengthened. Number three, we could just go the route of private equity. Let me go back to the expense thing. We could make ourselves feel really good in the short term, and our balance sheet would look incredible. We would just cut all this stuff. The problem with that vision is this: we're sharing 22% of our revenue going forward, but we're not sharing 22% of our expenses. So even if you cut a bunch today, eventually your expenses are going to outrun your revenue down the road. So is there areas to tighten our belts? 100%. We've already started that, and there'll be more of that. You can go private equity, and again, feel really good and turn over control, and you'll feel good. You'll get an infusion of cash. I'm not a guy that hates private equity, so I'm not saying I think private equity is wonderful. I think private equity in the college space would be really challenging. And then number four is trying to come up with a different strategy that says, look, how do we accelerate our growth in revenue, and how do we look for efficiencies? You know, the very fact that private equity is interested in college sports tells me that college sports is undervalued and there's significant room for growth. So before we do any of those things, we're going to try to find an internal strategy with an external vision that gets at accelerated revenue while looking for some efficiencies. I think that can happen at Texas A&M, and I think it's going to happen. We'll have tough decisions to make, but we won't do anything that veers from our values here, and we will do that in as transparent a way as we possibly can. And it's not me. And you got to be really grateful for this. This is not Trev arbitrarily sitting in his desk coming up with these ideas. We've engaged really smart men and women who are going to help us to navigate and think through the business strategies about how we really think differently. You got the 12th Man Foundation, you got the athletic department, and over here's our business. And how do we do a better job of running our business? That's where we're focused. Does that make sense? That was like 12 minutes
That
long.
that was such a great explanation and breakdown of it because I truly feel like there's a lot, like you said earlier, there's a lot of confusion around this. So I really appreciate you taking the time to walk through that and explain that for our listeners.
Hmm.
So Trav, to wrap us up, the 2024-25 athletic year is quickly approaching. What are you most excited about for the upcoming year? And what is your overall vision? We're going back to that word vision for Texas A&M athletics.
Well, I mean, I think the job of a CEO of an organization is really to set the standard. And what are the expectations here? And to always push on what's next, what's aspirational, how do we just hold ourselves accountable? Because in athletics, like you guys know this, like you never stay the same. You either are getting better or you're getting worse. And so I had this little like it's just plan, execute, measure, correct. You make a plan, you have the courage to execute it, you have the humility to correct it, evaluate it, and correct it. And if we're constantly in that mode, I think we're going to be fine. And so I'm really excited about the first game in the Mike Elko era. I'm really excited about going to Kyle Field and to see that environment. I've heard so much about it, but to be able to witness it firsthand, I'm really, really excited about. And I think Texas A&M, under General Welsh's leadership and our Board of Regents, I think we have a chance to do things that have never been done here before. I honestly believe that. I think we have outstanding coaches. We just need to continue working on our unity of purpose. We have so many incredible resources out here, but unified visions tend to win in the end. And so I'm going to work really hard to set a really high standard. I mean, sometimes my staff will get tired of this, but if you walk into a room and the conference room is a 7-5 conference room, don't be surprised when the football team goes 7-5. Like there has to be a standard in everything we do here. And if we can't do it right, then we shouldn't do it at all. But this is a place that ought to have a really high standard and hold ourselves accountable. And if we do that in a really transparent, collaborative, and integrated way, I'm pretty excited about it.
Trev, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This has been a tremendous, awesome, excellent conversation. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Answering the Call, the official podcast of the 12th Man Foundation. A special shout out to our incredible podcast producer, Megan Hoffman, and to 12th Man Productions for their generous use of this studio. We also extend our heartfelt gratitude to every donor and season ticket holder for always answering the call through loyal support of Texas A&M athletics and our student athletes. We will be back soon with more content. Thanks and gig 'em.